What is up, people? My name's Anton and welcome back to September. Today we're going to take a little look at generating these kind of like cool glowing rocks inside of Cinema 4D and Octane, almost as like a little part 2 to my original crystal video, which was my first video. We're going to use some pretty similar techniques when it comes to generating the geometry, but we're going to dive into some mixed material generation and a little bit of look development with like the glowing element, and create a pretty cool look like this. It's got some lighting bits involved, but generally it's just a bit of like kit bashing textures again, but it ends up looking pretty cool. I've got another shot here of it being a little bit closer, but yeah, we'll go back creating this from scratch. We've got 2 materials here, so if you're looking for just like a regular rock look, we can achieve that too, and then we can start mixing in some little details and see what kind of result we'll get. So tag along for the ride. I hope I'll open up a new project here real quick and we can get started. Let me know what you guys think about the new sort of like Octane setup. I kind of prefer having this viewport here because it lets me sort of work in a little more detail, specifically with shots like this. So with that being said, I'm going to quickly change my resolution to something which works. So if we use width of 1280, maybe height of about 1500, that should work quite nicely. If we lock that on and just set our preview going, we've got our canvas ready to work with, and we can shoot our save. And I can show you how we can get that rock look. So we're going to be doing this pretty much all inside of C4D. We're not sourcing any assets this time, because I kind of wanted to delve into a little bit of like displacement to regular geometry and how you can get that sort of natural looking look, right? So if you remember from my original crystal tutorial, we're going to be using a pretty similar workflow. We'll set this up to about 500, 500, 500, start with a cube, grab ourselves a Voronoi fracture and drop that in. We can take this, click on point generator under sources, and just change the point amount to something like 50, so we've got a little more. And what we're going to do is then bake this and choose which point sort of fits our uses a little more. For some reason we're getting a little bit of a weird glitch there, so maybe if we change the seed to something that works. Hopefully there's definitely one on another side somewhere, but that's fine. We can hit C on this, or rather we need to do something else real quick. So this is what I wanted to highlight on. If we head to object here and just turn off the offset fragments ever so slightly, so we got some gaps we can look at, we might as well, while we're working on displacing and sort of making these look a little more realistic, head to detailing here, and click enable detailing. And now what that's going to do is essentially apply a displacer, but only to the inside sort of like faces, which you can sort of see through here. Really cool. While we've got the option, we're going to be doing this later on anyway, once we take them out and bake them off, so we may as well do it here. You got some controls here, and what I find is the more I change these, it sort of like warps the rocks a little bit, so I tend to keep it pretty close to default, but it's a cool little tip to sort of like have on while it's there. So you can change your noise type here. Obviously you can switch from box to a lot of these. We'll dive into these a little more later, but from what I found, turbulence tends to be the best because it's just a little more subtle, and works better with the other elements for control. So what we can do now is hit C on this, like we said, and we'll do what we did before, and that is just head to our live selector here, and just pick out what rock in this element we kind of want to focus on. If you're creating a scene where you want to like scatter rubble like I did before, you can pick out a few. Obviously that would work in your favor. We don't need to UV map them as such in this tutorial, so that is fine. You can just sort of like pick out as many as you can, you know, apply solvers, whatever, or scatter them or random effect to them. That's fine, but for today I'm just going to pick one so I can sort of like focus on it, and just find one with a more natural look that sort of fits what I'm going for. So something like this looks pretty cool. Generally, as like a rule of thumb, the outside faces don't tend to work too well. They look a little off, just because like how often do you see rocks with flat or corner faces? Definitely not the corner ones anyway. I'm sort of seeing this one and I think that looks pretty cool. I tend to sort of gravitate towards these ones with the sharper edge. Maybe we can go for something a little more different this time. That one has quite a flat face, but you know what, we'll work with something like this. So let's go for this one for now. If we got our rectangle selection tool and literally drag up like this, we can delete all the ones we don't need and highlight on our one here. So we can right click this, make sure we got the fracture displacer in the same null, just right click and click connect objects and delete, and we're going to have our nice rock there ready to work with. So there's a few little things we need to do with this before we can actually get working with this. Hold on. What I'm trying to do is click this so we can get the axis working, move that up and then move it back down. So we now got a nice centered rock. We can set up our scene real quick just while we're here so we can get ready to work. We can move this rock up a little bit. This is what I mean by adjusting the axis. I tend to move it down. If you click this, it lets you move the arrows around, and it means that you can find a point like this, unclick it so you can move it again. And if we ever come to rotating the rock, which we'll do in a sec, it makes it way easier. Nice one. So I've got my scene set up here. I'm realizing that the axis isn't entirely centered, which is fine. When we start rotating this, you'll see we're getting a little bit of a weird rotation. But what we're going to try and do is, so first off, sort of make this geometry look a little nicer, because right now it's looking super Minecrafty and blocky. So we need to go about warping this a little more than what we've already done. The way I'm going to sort of go about doing that is using a few techniques. So right now, if we take a look at this, we're going to realize the geometry is super simple. Not too simple, but it's a lot of like triangular geometry, and it's not going to give us a lot of the detail that we need when we start displacing it or creating some effects. So just as a rule, I'm going to chuck it into volume builder super quick, set this down to about voxel size 1, put it in voxel measure like that. I'm just going to turn the thing off real quick. We are going to get a lot of flat faces. For some reason the displacer didn't bake when we did that detailing, but it's not to worry because we're going to do a really similar thing any second. If we head here and put the voxel size up a little bit, maybe something to like 5, we can get some more. This sort of depends how rounded you want your edges to be. But then if you grab yourself an STF smooth here, you can really work with that. So the smaller it is, the less the STF smooth sort of like comes in. So this is pretty along the lines of the crystal work that I did before. But that's fine. We've got ourselves a almost boulder type shaped rock here. But this is where we want to do some displacement work. So what we can do, now we put it in the volume measure, is we can see our geometry is far more dense. Some would say this is too dense, but for what I like to do, this gives me a lot of creative control in the next step. So what we can do is head to dual shading, and we can use the displacer tool here to start creating a little bit of variation on these rock faces. So if we head in here, we can top in the shading tab, and under shader, we can get ourselves a noise. And this noise is what is going to attribute the sort of like placement or displacement of the rock, I guess, against this map here. So for those that are familiar with noise, the higher we make the scale, you know, the bigger the map's going to be, right? So we can scale that up there, and then obviously that's not the best example to show, but if I scale it down a little bit, you can see the noise starts feeding in a little more. So that is sort of one of your main parameters for adjusting the like variation of the scale, right? In this case, we don't want this kind of noise, and this is where all of these sort of come into play. So you've got box noise at the front, which you can see is you've got a little preview here, almost like vector blurred sort of mosaic noise. You've got this blistered turbulence, which was a displacement that I used on the last one to sort of cover the entire rock. Not this strong, that's for sure. So if we head to object, you can tone down the strength here, so we get a little bit of like a rock sort of face look. And this is something we can combine with other displacers to sort of create a better look. I'm going to turn this up ever so slightly, maybe to like 90%. And I'm also going to turn the global scale down to maybe something like 150. Your strength and your contrast almost work together in noises like this. So that's something you can sort of bear in mind, because the noise or the displacement is working on like a white to black ratio. You're working with alphas again. So, you know, the lower the contrast is, it's becoming more gray. The higher the contrast is, obviously you're literally thresholding it to black and white. And that's when you create a super crazy look. So it's a pretty binary way of displacing, but it works fairly well. If we turn that up a little bit, and this is where you can sort of like tweak along. I think 100% may even be a better outcome here. Maybe 150. But we'll leave something like this for now. So we have something that at least covers the rock that looks a little more jagged and displaced, right? What we want to do is they'll turn that off. We can, move that back in. We can control click on this to duplicate it, drag it. Oh, not a camera. drag it back in, turn it back on, and we can have a look at, we want to make sure, we can have a look at changing this displacement. So we can go from electric. A lot of these are scaled down quite a lot, but it kind of depends what kind of look with the rock you're going for. I want a displacement which is a little bigger this time, right? So it creates almost faces like this is what I say, something closer to this. Something which looks pretty varied. So this one looks quite cool. I'm going to see what it looks like if I hop in here and then turn the straight height up, maybe. So this is almost creating sort of like wispy looks, but you can see how the higher geometry is sort of like working in our favor for this. I'm going to leave it at about 10 and see what that looks like with the other one. In fact, I may even turn this one down a little bit. I don't like how big it is, so I'm tempted to do this and then change my strength down to maybe something a little more like this. A few geometry glitches, I think, because it's too small for how many polygons we've got. So maybe if we put that to like 25. You kind of want to work hand in hand with what you've got available to you. This looks pretty cool. If you want one to be more exaggerated, you can do something like that. And we're getting some pretty creative rocks looks here. So obviously, if you've got a reference, work towards that. For now, I'm sort of getting creative and seeing what comes to mind. But that should be a little better than what we had before, right, to say the least. So we're getting more of these like rock faces now. So say we were happy with that, I think we could have chosen a bit of a better rock silhouette in this case. But this works cool. We can start working on some materials. So let's get our focal length and let's whack that up, because I think the focus of this should really be these materials. That's sort of where the interest comes in. And we can create some cool looks. So we've got this angle. We can play with maybe a few more rock angles to see if there's anything that looks a little better. We can rotate this round. Take a look at how we can sort of like catch the light to make it a little nicer. Mouse has been a little funky today, but if we go for maybe something, take a look. Sort of just rotating until I see something which comes more to mind. We really have a flat face here, so I feel like we should probably take advantage of that. Make that the focus of our piece rather than trying to escape it. We've got some nice corners down here too, so maybe something along these lines, right? If we grab that and then move it, just hit W if you want to straighten the axis. We can get something like that, and that now fits pretty nicely in our canvas, right? So we're good to kind of go. If you want, you can get some lighting in there straight away. I don't think the lighting was too complex with this. I literally got myself a HDRI. I just dragged in Creative Office here, so just any sort of like directionally lit HDRI, right? Set this to aces, so we've got some nice directional lighting. And then, you know, I got this working. Maybe a little like this for now. Anyway, we can tweak this later. In fact, we definitely will tweak this later. And then I kind of wanted a white background, right? So if I grab up a plus library again, head down into my favorite white background. So this one here, pop that in. You set that to visible environment. So we're blending the two. We can now get ourselves either a gray or white background. I kind of like this. And this is where you can tweak the light to sort of like work hand in hand with what you've got. But I think something like this looks pretty cool. Don't need to worry about it being over bright for now. We can always tone it up, but let's just let it catch the shadows. Cool. So now we can start creating some material. So we're going to start with creating as much of like a rocky material as we want. We want to probably just get ourselves a glossy material for now. It makes it a little better. We can change it later, but there's a load of things we need to activate or disactivate with universal materials. If we wanted to work with this, in fact, let's make sure we're hitting C on our displaced, or rather connect objects and delete on our displaced rock there. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can maybe flatten these out a little bit. I'm aware that if I put it into a subdivision surface, it's going to go very, very high polygon. But I'm interested to see if it sort of like fixes it. It does seem to, but if I take a look now, this rock is going to be completely black. You should never really be looking at a completely black geometry in Cinema 4D, but it may work for now. Let's just Control S for that. You can remesh it later if it comes to it. Let's change our render settings down just so I don't have to do it later and I don't get myself a nasty Octane crash. We can hit save and let's get back to work. So what we want to do is drag our material on here, make sure we're setting it to cubic and seamless because we haven't UV'd it, and if we can save ourselves UV, and we might as well, we can head on here and see what we can do. So things we want to bear in mind for this rock material, we want ourselves some diffuse channels, some roughness, and really some bump. We don't need to worry about the normal, we need displacement too, but we don't need to worry about the normal as such because of the displacement that we've already done in 3D on the actual geometry, right? Which is cool because it saves us going into Photoshop. So if we grab this now, this is where you can really pick out whatever textures you have. I have this like surface library for Megascans, and whenever I type in grunge in my Windows thing, it always comes up. So I tend to source a load of my grunge textures from here, but I can literally run through and pick anything that looks rocky enough to me that works. So we got some sort of like mask grunge here, which looks cool. Kind of depends what you're after a little bit. I feel like we might be better off setting the diffuse to black here so we can sort of see what we're doing a lot more. Say I wanted to include this, maybe we can make this more like a roughness type tab. We could plug that in on roughness and we could see how a lot of this stuff is made. If you want to, this is a tip that I kind of wanted to show for this video. If you want to see how one texture gets plastered on that geometry, you can right click on it and click solo node, and that's going to show just that texture. And that's where you can either get transform node here or just change the scaling of the material up here, and then down here you can change the percentages to see what works. Typically I tend to use the transform node here, but that's a pretty cool way of seeing where the roughness will actually be affected. So say that's what we want, we can disable the node. Let's get ourselves the gray one because that is the actual roughness. The mask tends to be a little more binary, so we can plug that in. Shoot ourselves a quick re-render, see if we're getting any effect there. We're still getting quite a lot of shines here, but because we don't have an idea what we want to make as such, apart from the sort of like the previous work that I did, we can just whack a load of these together and see what we like. So let's go back to surface, see if we can find ourselves some cool stuff. So this looks pretty interesting, but kind of spotty. You want to look at texture which you'd feel you could find on a rock. Got some cool masks here. These look quite nice. Oh, so if I grab something like that, we can plug that in on the diffuse, for example. We can add a few together too. So just make sure this is constantly refreshing. We've got some nice. In fact, so let's just hop out the camera here so we can see these angles a little more. We've got some nice white on black going on there, so getting a lot of a bit of a dark material. Maybe we can grab ourselves a color correction node, drag that in here and change the gamma a little bit. So we wanted to brighten that up, we could do something a little more like this, but we're still working with white on black, right? So I feel like it might be better if we grab let's refresh this real quick. Oh, I know the roughness can be a little bit brighter, so we drag that in there, just plug that in the search path and then edit this again. Maybe we can get a little bit of a more tame sort of texture, so that looks pretty cool. We're already catching a lot of shadows and a lot of nice scratches, which is really what you want when you're recreating the sort of like nature. You want as much imperfection as you can really get. So we're getting some cool scratches there. That looks nice. Something I've realized is that typically when you're looking at rocks, right, the inside is quite chalky, it's quite white. So you want less black scratches and more white. And my thinking is if I invert this, we can probably achieve that. We need to make sure we're setting this to aces too. But you can see this already looks a little more rocky because those scratches are becoming a bit more white, right? So we can go with something a little like this. Make sure we're zooming in and just getting some nice looks at this to make sure it's what we're after. That looks pretty cool. Let's see if we can find maybe one more texture just to sort of like blend with, because I remember last time I kind of used an add node to work this out a little bit. We head back into surface and maybe we've got some damage things here. Let's take a look at what these damage textures look like. So these are quite scratchy but almost metally. Maybe if we vary these through a little bit, we can see. So these are super scratchy. That's like chalk on whiteboard. If we head back down here, my PC's been a little slow actually loading these images. That looks cool, but not quite strong enough for my liking. I want something which is going to really shine through on the rock. We can go for something a little more like this, which has quite a few scratches on it. Let's drag that. If we get ourselves an add node at this point, we can put that in diffuse, put the color correction from number 1 and the texture we just imported in number 2. And we can see the result there. This is a pretty cool point where you can right click and go solo node, and you can see what each of these specific textures do, right? So you've got that, which is getting added into this. If you wanted to, or in fact I'd recommend it just so you have more control, you can grab a color correction on that node too, solo this, and you can work with the gamma on that. So if you wanted something a lot darker, you could do that. You can invert it so you get in the black, but I kind of prefer this. And let's work. We can work on that add node here and then start tweaking these color corrections as we like, seeing what's bringing in what. And work to generate. So that's obviously far too white there. Maybe we can work something a little more like this. Let's head back to our camera view so we can see what we're getting. This looks pretty nice. If we hop back in here and just disable the solo node, it's gonna apply with some roughness. We need to work on that roughness is one thing that I'm definitely noticing. Or maybe we can at least turn down the specular. That kind of works a little more. So we're getting more of a rocky look here. You want to lean away from the reflections a little bit because obviously rocks don't typically tend to reflect too much. If we rotate our HDRI a little bit, we can get some better angles. But if you're happy with that white look, then that is something that we can really go for. If you head back on your material here, one thing I'm bearing in mind is that I kind of want to add some bump and then some displacement, right? So for the bump, all I did was get some noise. So this was super easy. I literally grabbed this in, set it to noise, the scale down to about 10%, I believe, and then literally plugged it in on bump and it added this nice little bumpiness. You want it a little smaller than that. Almost so small that it sort of like sits below the pixels and just adds a nice little bit of variation that makes your material look less perfect, which is what we're going for. So we set that for 2.5, maybe 3. You can sort of see it is literally microscopic, but it works perfectly. My first sort of like my first reaction when I do this is to always turn up the contrast, but you realize that when you get to a certain point, it almost becomes invisible for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. So you want your contrast to sit about here, because I want the strength to be quite high but still visible, and that's where we're getting our nice result. So now what we can do is literally think about our displacement. We're going to need to replug this in later with the mixed material, but if we just grab our displacement there and then figure out what material we kind of want to be displaced, we've got a lot here to choose from, but we have this mask here which we've kept around, which is black and white, and that's more what we kind of want to be plugged into the displacement. So if we put that into texture, make sure we set the level of detail here to whatever this is, but I'm guessing 4096. Yeah, we can pop that in. The height is about 10 centimeters, which is probably way too high. Let's shoot this little quick re-render and see what result we get. It's taking a little minute, but if we give it time, it's probably gonna be quite strong, I'm guessing. Yep, so we're getting a lot of spikiness. We need to tone that right down, maybe to about 1 centimeter, just so we get some stuff working with the bump and the roughness to generate a little bit of imperfection. And this looks pretty cool. We do see some spikes there which look a little much, so I'm inclined to turn that down to about 0.5. But the good thing is that because this is a texture that we've used before up here, it'll work hand in hand with what's already diffused to sort of make it fit a little nicer. And just like that, we're getting a pretty nice rock look. So I'd say we're pretty happy with that to sort of like mix into something else now. So we haven't changed any of these values down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete this for now and go about making our second material. Now, what I did last time for the second material was I was gravitating between either using the specular material or metallic, because I wanted parts of the rock to shine, right? But I ended up using the specular, so I got this nice glow. If we grab specular and pop it on our material. Make sure we're setting this to cubic and seamless again, just for continuity. We're going to get a glass material, obviously, put across our rock. What we want to do is we want to turn this into like a crystally sort of glow. And the way we do that is by hopping in here, and we're going to use the same technique before, which was adding a bump. So bump almost works pretty similar to roughness when you're working with glass in terms of just scattering the light as much as possible. So if we grab ourselves a noise again, and we'll do that same thing like last time, we'll plug it into bump. You can set the noise with glass, you couldn't before. We can turn the scale all the way down to something more like 5, I'm guessing, something that's still sort of like visible. And you will see you will completely scramble the light that is falling into that rock, so much so that it almost looks like a glossy material again. But this is what we want. And what's important about this is that as you rotate the HDRI, you'll see, especially if light's coming from behind, it's going to shine through the rock, and that's what's going to create the glowy effect, right? So now we want to change the color of this a little bit, and we have some control and a lot of freedom with how we can do that. I leave a lot of this pretty much the same, but what I change is I go into transmission here, and this is where you can pick whatever color you want to shine through your rock, right? So if you want red, if you want more of like an amber sort of thing to shine through, you can do that. But what I thought was pretty cool is grabbing a gradient. So I've got myself an Octane gradient here. I plug that into the transmission, and then I set the type here to radial, I believe, to get some cool patterns like this, although it kind of went a little funny on me, but it works quite well. And then here you can load preset, and so you can pick any of these if these kind of like sort you out. I got sky last time, I believe, but I kind of might make my own this time. This gives you a super nice blue glow, and if you want a rainbow look, you can get yourself a rainbow look. But for example, flame will get you more of an amber one. The reason that this kind of works quite well is because this loops. If you take a look here, or not specifically, but you can change that. If you head here and then get the eyedropper tool, just pick that, this will now loop. So those sort of like weird like section glitches you got before won't be a thing, because it will loop round, and you get some way nicer lighter bits which work with your darker. For now, I may actually use this, because this is pretty much how you go about generating that glowy look, or rather what you mix it with. I know we're creating a sort of like glowy alien rock look here, but obviously if you wanted to, you could just stop at the regular rock material. But we're going to try and mix this in now. And the way we do that is by heading back to our original rock material here, zooming out of our node tree and just dragging in our second material. They're going to intertwine a little bit, but it's fine. Just make sure you got your glossy one and specular one here. Get ourselves an Octane mixed material. Mixed material just there. And what we're going to do is mix these together. Now, if any of you guys remember or know a little bit about Octane mixed materials already, you know that if we just plug these in, what it's going to do is just mix them like 50-50, like opacity almost, just by the amount that's here. So this is almost just like a float figure, which Octane's going to interpret and try mix the materials by. What we want to do is change that. Firstly, we want to grab the displacement here that we got plugged into Octane Glossy 1 and plug that here. So we're piping our displacement right through. And that's still going to sit on our rock. You can sort of see this look here. It looks a bit off, a little off. And what we're going to do is, just for ease of sort of demonstrating where we want the like crystal bits to be, and sort of have more of a, this is where the threshold sort of binary look comes in, because you want it to be like clearly in one area and clearly in another. So it sort of like defines where it is and where it isn't. I hope that sort of makes sense. But to do that, we're going to grab a noise again. So if we grab that here, it's a pretty universal like node or tool to have in C4D. We can plug that into a mount here, and we're going to see is that, especially if we turn the contrast up, we're going to get super defined areas of where the glass is versus where the rock is. We want to tone this up a little bit. So if we make it maybe like 1,000, you can also change the seed here to sort of get what you want. But you're going to see that as we turn this up, you're getting clearer areas where this rock is. So if you want it really defined, this kind of like takes away from the nature of it. It's almost as if they're sort of like welded together. You want the contrast sitting a little under 100%, I'd say, because you don't want them all shining or blending into each other, but you want enough of, you know, a sort of like blend for it to not look weird. So we can do is we can save that up, and you can change the seed, sort of like figure something out that you like. I kind of like this look here. I think it looks quite cool and it blends quite nicely. But what we want to do is manipulate the light just a little more so we get some more of a glow to it, right? So we're seeing we're getting a little bit here, but what you want to do is there is a point, it depends what HDRI you're using and it depends what lighting setup you're using, but for me, there is a point in this rotation. I think it's because I've got a pretty directional HDRI here. What I mean by directional is that about 70% of it is not dark, but like room light temperature, just regular room lighting. And then I've got this 20% with these window, or the thing is just like one window, which is pretty bright. And then what that lets me do is as I rotate this, I can see that this is where the light is facing. If I make it shine from behind my rock here, I can get that light to shine through the glass. Now this is what I meant. Once you find that right angle, you can really start to create some cool looks. The only thing is that it takes away a little bit from the regular rock texture that you've got. Because it will sort of like ever so slightly overpower it, and obviously if the light's coming from behind, you're not getting too much here. So you kind of want to balance that out a little bit, and something like this works pretty well. So we're getting some nice light coming from the right there, we're getting the texture of the actual rock brought out here, and we're getting the glow from the mix. And you can see this is blending in pretty perfectly. This is kind of what I had in mind, considering it's sitting just below 100% contrast. You're getting a nice bit of where the rock is and a nice little bit of the displacement that we applied there over the whole thing, and where the glow comes in. And just like that, you're pretty much ready with your look. So if you're creating something volcanic, some sort of like lava scene, or you just really want to glow up and sort of like bring something different to your rock renders, I guess, or if there's something that you can use in nature, sort of like scatter across your scene, you can do that. But for now, this is what I wanted to recreate. So I'm hoping you lot can put this something cool. And I'll see you very soon with some new wacky stuff that you can make. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope I was clear, and I hope you guys can follow along. I really try my best to be, even though I sort of like weasel around sometimes. And yeah, having said that, thank you everybody for watching. I'll see you very soon in the next video.